What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here with a new daily video. All of the stories therein are new to this channel as well as I can keep track of. So if you guys end up enjoying this video and you guys are enjoying these daily videos, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. It really helps the video to do well and ensures I can keep making these videos daily for a long time to come. If you guys have any thoughts you'd like to share in the comments, either about the stories or the video itself, please be sure to leave them in the comments below, as one of my favorite parts about doing this is reading your guys' comments, even if I may not always be able to respond to them. Either way, I'm gonna let you guys enjoy the next hour or so of true scary stories, and I'll see you again at the end of the video. Thanks for watching. This happened back in the early 1960s. My family at the time lived in a very rural West Virginia area. We also had a very big family as well. My mom was only one out of 12 kids. She grew up in an extremely rural shack with her extremely poor family. She got pregnant with me at a young age and got married to my father. My dad didn't really consistently work, so we didn't consistently have any money. We always had a place to live though, because one of my older brothers had an old house nestled into a holler that he let us rent from him. This was, of course, in an even more rural area. We lived out in the hills and up the roads that weren't even gravel at the time. They were all made out of dirt. It took nearly an hour's worth of driving just to get off the country roads and onto main ones. We normally didn't have a whole lot to do, especially when we were younger, and especially at nighttime. The house was an old house, but it did have some electricity. We didn't have a television, but we did have a radio, so a lot of the time that we were allowed to be up late, which was not very often, mind you. We were up listening to radio shows or baseball games. This happened one summer night, when we were all up late listening to the radio together. It was me, my 3 younger siblings, my mom, and my dad. I don't really know how late it was, because I was so young at the time this happened. One particular thing about this house was that it was set back about 100 feet into the holler. The living room window faced the front of the house and the driveway, so if someone were to pull into the driveway, we would either see the car pulling in during the day, or we would see the headlights pulling in at night. On this particular night, I think we were all very surprised to see headlights showing that a vehicle was now pulling into our driveway. My dad got up and walked to the window and very briefly looked out it. We kept a shotgun sitting by the front door at all times. My dad was generally a very suspicious man, but he didn't reach for his gun yet. That indicated to us that maybe he knew who it was who was coming to the door. If he hadn't known who it was, he would have also told us kids to go into the bedroom at the back of the house. It only took him a moment before he opened the door. It was his younger brother, my Uncle Bill. At first, we began to relax. It had been weird seeing someone pull up to the house so late at night. But we always enjoyed seeing Uncle Bill. The feelings of relaxation didn't last very long, however. I guess we couldn't tell exactly what Bill was really upset about at the time, but even as younger kids, we could tell immediately that something was off. This was confirmed when our father suddenly told all us kids to get up right away and go to the back room of the house. Before we went, I saw something else. There was a new pair of headlights shining through the front window of our home. Another car was on its way down our driveway. As we ran to the back room of the house, we heard our dad growling at his brother. "Why the hell did you come here?" Although we were rushed into the back room, it was possible to hear some of what was going on outside. The other kids were even more terrified than I was. I was trying my best to keep everyone calm. At the same time, I was also trying to hear what was going on outside. I heard the front door open and close. I was pretty sure that now my dad and probably my uncle were both outside. There was suddenly a lot of yelling, although I was unable to make out the exact words. I began to wonder why my mother hadn't come back to check on us yet, because it was obvious that something really bad was going down. I figured she was probably watching everything from the front window. All I could hear now was yelling from many different people. I couldn't make out exactly what anyone was saying. I was trying my best. It was then that I heard a howl of pain, and I heard my mom scream. Immediately after, I heard a shotgun blast ring out in the night. There was more yelling and screaming, and the other kids who had been doing their best to remain calm began to completely freak out. I had to do my best to calm them down in this situation. However, I was able to make out the fact that I heard a car pulling quickly out of the driveway. There were more noises, and I heard someone rushing into the house. This worried me. I wondered if whoever had pulled up had shot my dad, and that's why my mom had screamed. I was worried they were going to hurt my mom and then come after us as well. This continued until the door opened, and thankfully it was my mother at the door. She ordered us all into bed and didn't tell us a single thing about what happened. As the years passed by, I found out some, but not all, of the details that happened. My uncle had seemingly gotten into trouble with some guys for whatever reason, and he came to my dad to seek help that night. The guys had followed him to our house, and when confronted, one of them stabbed my uncle. This resulted in my dad firing his gun, which scared the people away. I was surprised to hear that he didn't actually kill anyone. The guys ran off, and my dad took my uncle to the hospital. I never did find out what my uncle had done that made the guys mad, but that doesn't matter to this story, I guess. Just being 7 years old in an old house, hearing everything that went on, was the scariest thing I ever experienced. Because of an experience I had at a water park once, I won't even get into the water for any reason nowadays. In fact, I don't even really like taking a shower. I'll do it, of course, but I don't enjoy it very much at all. And there's no way at all I would ever take a bath again. I was 12 years old, and it was a very hot summer. I guess it probably wasn't anything like the hot summers we have now, but I remember it being pretty damn brutal for the time, especially because we didn't have any air conditioning. Going to the water park was going to be such an amazing treat, simply because it was a chance to have a completely nice and cool day. My mom, dad, older brother, and younger sister all went to the park together. It was a really huge one, with many different pools and slides and other such attractions. My sister was about 7 years old, so she stayed with our parents when they went to the more parental area of the pool. My brother was 15 at the time, and he went off to go find girls or something. So that meant I was left all by myself to find my own entertainment at the pool. I didn't really mind, however, as I was the bookish, nerdish type that usually preferred to be by myself anyway. I was a lot different than my brother, actually. He was the big, athletic type that had tons of friends. I was a smaller, nerd type who had many bullies. In fact, looking back at the behavior of many of the bullies who were in my school, it wouldn't surprise me today if they were serving prison sentences. I was often a victim of this, but more often I watched it happen to other people. Most of the bullies knew who my brother was, and he was a big guy who could easily beat the hell out of any of them, so they only messed with me when they could get away without being seen. I was having a good time going down the slides, but mostly I was spending a lot of time in the pools. I really wasn't that good of a swimmer at the time, you see. I could keep myself afloat at least, though, and I kept toward the side often to keep myself from going under. I don't know how much time had passed by. We had gotten there pretty early, but I knew it wasn't lunchtime yet at least. The sun was crawling higher up into the sky, and it was now beaming down pretty hard on me. I figured I would go and seek out my parents just in case it was time for lunch, but I wanted to go down one more water slide first. You know how kids are, one more time. So I climb out of the pool and make my way over to a slide. There was, of course, quite a bit of a line, as there was with every other slide. I didn't mind too much, though. I was already soaked and wet, so I was still pretty cooled off from the sun's rays. After a long wait, I finally got to the end of the line. When it was my turn, I was quite ready. I should mention that although I enjoyed the thrill of the slide, I was still a little bit frightened by it. I was frightened in the same way you would be with a roller coaster, though. I wasn't scared to go on them exactly, but I would always close my eyes whenever I did. So I closed my eyes and slid down the water slide. I remember it pretty well because it was one that had all these twists and turns in it. With my eyes closed, I wouldn't have any idea when I was about to hit the water at the bottom. It made it so much more fun. I hit the water, and at first, I got that really great splash feeling that anyone who's ever gone down a water slide already knows about. Before I could get back up to the surface, though, I felt someone grab a hold of the back of my head. Whoever this person was, they were obviously far stronger than I was. At first, I thought it might be my older brother. He would sometimes be a bit of a bother in the way he would pick on me, but not really try to hurt me, you know? But if that were him, he would have let go after the initial grabbing. This person was not doing that. They held me down under the water, despite the fact I was now thrashing and trying to get away from them. I'd been under so long that I accidentally breathed in a little water even. I couldn't hold my breath any longer. It was one of the most painful experiences I'd ever had in my entire life. That didn't exactly help me stay calm. It made me panic more and more as I thrashed around and inhaled even more water. At that point, everything got dark, and I was certain I was now drowning to death. The next memory I had was waking up in a hospital bed, actually. When I awoke, I was very confused. I didn't understand where I was, how I got there, or what was even going on. It took a while before the memory of going down the water slide and nearly drowning came rushing back to me. When it did, I began to panic once again. Thankfully, I calmed down. What happened is this bully named Dennis, who gave me some problems at school occasionally, just happened to notice me going to the top of the slide alone, so he got in the water and waited for me to come down, then held me underwater when I did. The lifeguards, which should have broken this up immediately, did not. That's why I was underwater for so long. Thankfully, they finally pulled their heads out of their asses and saved me from Dennis. Then one of them performed a rescue breathing on me. I have absolutely no memory to this day of surviving through that rescue breathing. Every horror fan knows, though, that if a lifeguard lets a young boy drown while he's being picked on by bullies and the lifeguard's not paying attention, they'll come back with a hockey mask for revenge. I don't know if I'll do that, though. I went to high school in the early 90s. I had actually switched many high schools because of complications with my family. I moved back and forth between my parents for a while, and they both tended to move quite a bit as well. Finally, though, when I was a junior, we were at a school where I could stay and graduate. I made an interesting and fairly large and diverse group of friends. I hung out with the punks, the alternative people. I was sort of just a plain cute guy, and I didn't really fit in with any group as far as image goes. You know, everyone had mohawks, spot clothes from Hot Topic. Everyone was just kinda different than me. I was very plain, so I felt like I had to develop an alternative personality as well. Now, I know nowadays that there are a bunch of kids who dress goth-like and call themselves vampires. Back then, I also adopted a vampire persona, but it was not a bit like the ones of today. First, I didn't change my look at all. What I did do was tell stories, though. I had a really in-depth backstory about my life as a vampire. First, I went into the vampire lore to explain why I could spend time in the daylight. Vampires normally could be in sunlight, but their strength was sapped from them. They were stronger at night. I created this whole conflict as well between two groups of vampires called the Lamb and the Crow, and I was a member of the Crow. When my friends and I hung out after school talking, there was also this guy named Matt who was there with me. He was really fascinated by all the stories I came up with. I mean, everyone else accepted them as just something I talked about a lot of the time, but Matt was really fascinated. One time after school, my friend cut her hand and was bleeding a bit. She asked me if I wanted to drink her blood. Before I had any chance to react to this joke, though, Matt grabbed her hand and actually started sucking the blood from her wound. Afterward, he asked me if that would get him membership to the Crow. I was extremely weirded out. I still kept up my storyline though. I told him that all vampires drink blood. Members of the Crow have to drink blood that's actually from a crow in front of another member. It seemed completely harmless to me at the time. That was until several days later, when my friend and I were hanging out in the school hallway. Matt came up to us, extremely excited, and told me that he had a big surprise for me. Matt reached into his backpack and pulled out the body of a dead crow. We were all shocked at first, but not as shocked as when he bit into the crow's neck and began to slurp and suck the blood out of its corpse. We all sat there in disgust and shock. Matt pulled his face from the crow. There was blood on his lips and dripping from his mouth. He was smiling so large, like I had never seen anyone do before. "Am I in now?" Matt asked. I couldn't do anything but nod. It was the strangest and most bizarre thing I had ever seen, and I didn't know how to react. Matt was a junior too, but shortly after he was pulled out of school. He had always been a very smart guy. We were told he was going off to college early and skipping a high school graduation. I really hope that's true. He went really weird for a while, and it wouldn't surprise me if he ended up in a psych ward or something. Honestly, I feel a little guilty for starting the whole thing. No one but Matt ever took it seriously, and he took it very, very seriously, surprisingly so. The experience was so startling that I gave up on the whole vampire thing after. I did adopt a sort of psycho Hannibal Lecter thing for a while, but fortunately no one took that seriously enough to go and eat someone's face or something. Full disclosure, this happened 10 years ago, but I still can't believe how lucky I was to get away. I was 16 and female, and running late for school as usual. Walking down the road, I noticed a dark green car with tinted windows slowly following along behind me. This was a residential community, and it wasn't unusual for people to drive slowly because of this. It was around 9 a.m. or so on a weekday, so I naively figured there could be no danger in broad daylight as I hurried towards the bus stop. Arriving at the stop, it started to suddenly rain, so I decided to stand in the small glass bus shelter to wait for the bus. The creeping green car stopped right in front of me. The driver got out and approached me in the bus shelter. The bus shelter was so small, there was only room for 2 people. He stood in the entrance and grabbed each side, trapping me there. He was very large and extremely physically intimidating. Something about his dead eyes sent chills through my entire body. He asked if I was familiar with the area, and I responded that yes, I was. He asked if I was going to school, and I again responded yes, I was. He then asked if he could drive me there so I could show him the way. Call it intuition or whatnot, but something in my head was screaming not to get in that car with him. I politely declined his offer and asked if he needed some help with directions or something. Out of nowhere, he lunged at me. He grabbed my arm and began to pull me out of the bus shelter towards his car. I started screaming as he kept on insisting it would be faster to drive. By the grace of God, the bus pulled up at that exact moment. All my instincts told me to fight. I clawed at his face. I kicked him. I bit him. I contorted my body until he loosened his grip on my arm. Once free, I leapt on the bus as though my life depended on it. The bus driver asked if I was okay, but I was unable to reply. I ran to the back to find a seat I could hide in and cried quietly in the corner as the bus carried me off to school. All day I sat in class and said nothing about what happened to me. When I got home from school, though, I immediately told my parents what happened. They were of course horrified, especially after I showed them the big palm-shaped bruise from the man's hand on my arm. We contacted the police. The officer arrived later that evening and took my full statement. He said there had been several similar incidents in the area and asked if I could come to the station and look at some pictures to identify the culprit. The following week, my mom and I headed down to the station. The officer set up with a computer and we started to scroll through all these mug shots. There were so many. Not only was it discouraging to realize how many known sex offenders there were close by, but after a while, all the faces started to blur together. I was losing hope of identifying the guy. We were about to give up when I recognized those distinct dead eyes in one of the pictures. The officers asked if I was sure. I confirmed it was him, but he seemed to have grown a thick beard since the photo was taken. They thanked me and said they would call if needed. 2 weeks later, the news announced that the police had apprehended the man suspected of kidnapping and assaulting young girls in the area. The news story included his mugshot. It was the very same man I'd identified. He had been caught with an underage victim in his car. It took years for the gravity of this incident to truly hit me. Had the bus arrived a second later, had I not been able to twist myself out of his grasp, had he grabbed me while I was walking and didn't see him, things could have turned out very differently. I was very fortunate that day, but many others were not so lucky. This is an incident that occurred when I was around 9 years old. Even today, when I'm 34, I still think about what could have been. As a child, my parents both worked full-time, and sometimes they couldn't find or afford a babysitter, especially when I had winter, summer, or spring break. This meant I would be home alone until either one of them returned from work that day. There were two main rules they had whenever this happened. 1, never answer the door, and 2, don't ever play too close to the windows, because you never know who might be watching. I was 100% guilty of hanging out near the windows though. I liked the lighting and I was a very bored kid. I mean, come on, no one had ever knocked on the door before while I was home alone. So, my father left for work that day and went over the rules with me again. After a few hours of playing near the window as usual, all of a sudden, somebody knocked on the door. I froze. I knew not to answer at least. They knocked again. At this point in my tiny mind, I was thinking it had to be someone important if they were knocking twice. So, I answered. I opened the door, and standing there was an intimidating-looking woman with a clipboard. She was wearing a hat with an American flag on it, very official-looking to a child. The woman asked me how old I am. I lied and said I was 12. She said she was from some institution I can't remember the name of, and told me, "You're a liar. You're home alone and that's illegal. You have to come with me now. Let's go." I started crying very loudly. I was scared my parents were going to get in trouble. After all, this woman was an adult. She must be right? In fact, I almost went with her, until I started crying even louder. A neighbor in our complex noticed what was going on and shouted at her. The lady all of a sudden told me, "Never mind, it's okay. You don't have to come with me. Just be quiet." She hurried off. At the time, my parents weren't doing so well financially, so we didn't even have a landline telephone. Cell phones? Certainly not in 1996. I couldn't call my family and I couldn't call 911 either. I had to wait all day for my dad to come back home. I'm assuming the woman knew I was home alone because she'd been watching me through the window. I never really spoke on the incident much because I felt like it was my fault for breaking the rules. Nowadays, though, I often think about how lucky I am that I didn't leave with her that day. I'm a 15-year-old male, but I was around 7 years old at the time this happened. It's hard to remember things from when I was that young, and I still do have PTSD from the entire thing. Before I tell you the whole story of what happened that day, though, I have to explain how we even found ourselves in such a situation in the first place. My dad was the kind of guy who, when he sets his mind on something, he just had to do it, and there was no talking him out of it. I know it really annoyed my mom, but she always supported him on all his ventures anyway. You know, the power of love or whatever. Because of this, when my dad said he wanted to buy a farm and grow some wheat for a living, my mom was not completely shocked. My dad had saved up a lot of money from his old job as a car salesman, and he already had a house picked out for us as well. My mom only told me very recently that she was frustrated my dad didn't even take into consideration how she would feel about it. The day after he suggested it to her, they listed the old house for sale, and it sold relatively quickly. Mom and Dad only had a couple of weeks to pack up the home they had lived in throughout their whole marriage. My mom said that when we got to the farm, it was just a total disaster. The house was in shambles, there was dust everywhere, and the land looked like it had been a place for BMX bikers to ride or something, with tracks and hills everywhere. Over the course of a few months, my dad had managed to level all the fields and partially fix up the house before running out of all the savings he'd had. My mom had no idea at the time that they were completely broke, but she figured something was up when all her expensive jewelry started to go missing. She found out later he had sold it to pay for the huge tractor he bought. My mom started to become unhappy in the marriage and felt like all Dad cared about was his dreams and never hers. She continued to put on a brave face though for me and basically just sucked it all up. My dad worked all day and night in those fields to prepare for the crops he had planned to eventually grow, but there was always seeming to be something preventing him. The soil wasn't nutrient-dense enough. There wasn't enough direct sunlight. The neighbors' goats keep wandering into our fields. Not enough daylight to sow the seeds, etc., etc. Eventually, my mom gave him an ultimatum. Start the crops within a week or we were moving back into the city and he would get a proper job again. She really hated being on that farm and she knew he was a big-time procrastinator, so she figured he'd never do it. And we'd be back in the city where life would be good again within about a month. With complete shock and utter disappointment though, she found she was wrong. He got straight to work the next day, tilling the earth to prepare for seeding. She had been hoping he would recognize her desperation to escape that place and finally put her feelings first, but of course she was wrong. After 3 days, he began to sow the seeds. He was out in the middle of the field that day when his tractor stopped working. Mom could see it smoking from where she was standing inside the house, so she called out to him to ask if everything was okay. He yelled from across the field and assured her everything was good. Mom told me to go outside and see if he needed some help. I walked out to the fields towards my dad and asked him if he needed me to do anything. He told me he was going to check the tractor for anything that needed fixing and told me I could sit in for a while if I wanted to watch while he did his thing. Of course, I said yes. I was a 7-year-old kid. What kid that age wouldn't want to sit in a tractor? My dad helped me climb up, and for the next 15 or so minutes, I sat there looking at all the levers and buttons while my dad looked around for the problem that was causing it to malfunction. He told me not to touch anything while I sat there, and I did keep my promise for the time being. I guess though I'd accidentally pulled one of the levers, and I felt the tractor lurch backward quickly in one swift motion. My dad grunted, and I heard a loud thud. I didn't really know what just happened. I hopped out of the tractor and looked back, only to see half of my dad's body pinned underneath. He was still aware and talking, and told me to go get my mom. I ran as fast as I could back to the house and burst through the door. At 7 years old, I had no idea how to contain my emotions in a time of emergency. I had tears running down my face. The best way my mom could describe how I sounded was a crying, mumbling mess. I was trying so hard to say what happened, but the words just wouldn't come out. Instead of talking, I pointed outside toward the tractor. She seemed to understand it was something urgent, having to do with my dad. My poor mom was struggling to get over to him. The ground was heavily broken up from the tractor tilling, and she kept falling in her attempt to get there. By the time she finally did, I saw her drop to her knees. I made my way over too. My dad was telling her everything was going to be okay, while she cried, leaning over him. She kept on saying how she couldn't live without him, and he needed to survive. He had begun to not make much sense with his words. Even I could tell at that age he was trying to say he loved her. My mom, determined to save his life and not thinking logically, got in the tractor and managed to drive it off of him. Unfortunately, that only made it worse. His lowered body was a complete mangled mess, and he was bleeding all over the ground. From what I could see, his legs were completely flat, and all his bones were sticking out of his flesh. My mom told me to look away, and to tell my dad I loved him. I had no idea what to do. I couldn't speak, and no matter how I tried, I couldn't look away either. That day, my dad took his last breath, and soon after, my mom rushed inside to call the police. When the paramedics got there, they told my mom there was nothing anyone could have done to save him. My mom tried telling me ever since that his death wasn't my fault. I was just a child. But for all the years I've gone through, and all the therapy I pushed myself through, I know in my heart that I killed my dad that day. Me and my mother were driving through our small town in Southwest Virginia. My mother and father are divorced, and he lived in Tennessee. Anyway, they had very different viewpoints on helping out hitchhikers, as my dad was very much into hiking, camping, etc. As we were driving along, I noticed there was a woman walking down the road. Mind you, it was very hot outside because it was summertime. I noticed she was carrying a child swaddled up in a blanket too. And that kinda struck me as a poor choice, considering it was the middle of summer. It seemed way too warm for such a swaddle. I turned to my mom and said this: "I think we need to pick that woman up. Surely she isn't far from where she needs to go. I mean, she has a baby." To my surprise, my mom pulled over into the gas station parking lot and told me to get in and grab a large bottle of water. We would then ask the woman if she needed a ride. So we pull out of the gas station and approach this thin, almost sickly-looking woman. She very quietly grabbed the door handle and got inside, not saying anything at all, not even a simple thank you. That didn't really sit right with me, because this is the South, and everyone at least is polite and approachable for the most part. We asked where she was heading to, and me, being the passenger seat, I turned around to look at her. She was looking down at her baby, cooing at it gently. She replied without even looking up from the swaddled being, about 2 miles past the Dollar General on Jeb Stuart. We were very close to that area. I decided to turn around fully and speak to the woman, maybe get a proper conversation going. As I got a better look at her baby though, I realized it was actually a drywall hammer wrapped up in a blanket, then wrapped inside another blanket. I froze. It was like I just walked into a deep freezer. I told my mom I really thought we should stop because I heard what sounded like knocking. I was very adamant that we needed to stop at the upcoming Dollar General and check on our car. As we pulled in, I told my mom to get out and that I needed her help locating the noise. We met each other at the hood of the car, which I popped up so the woman inside couldn't see us. "Mom, that's not a baby. She has a hammer in there." My mother advised me we should walk inside to see if they had anything to help close that up. We told the woman we would be right back. We walked inside and told them to call the police so they could come help this woman with whatever she needed. We could no longer have her in our vehicle. When we got back, my mom gave her some vague reason as to why we could not take her any further. She got out of the vehicle very angry, almost confused. We sped off before she could react though, and left her in the parking lot. I guess she very well could have been a really confused woman with some mental issues. I don't know exactly what was going on, but I do know that I don't think she had any good intentions for us. I grew up with my dad and brother. My mom died when I was 10. I was 13 at this point, and my brother was 16. He was out with some friends that night. I myself used to go out until late into the night and drink in the park with my friends. My dad was a severe alcoholic and always too drunk to even know if I was home or not. Because of this, I had free reign, and no rules or boundaries existed for me. My dad even used to invite random alcoholics and drug-using strangers into the home. Often when I came back, these strangers would still be there, and my dad would be passed out or asleep from having too much alcohol. Usually they would barely even notice I was there, and I'd go straight to my room. One day though, I'd just come back from hanging out with some friends. It was the early hours. I walked through the living room to go upstairs to my room, only to find my dad asleep in the armchair. The guy he'd brought back was some random guy, around his mid-50s or so. I didn't recognize him at all. He looked at me though, and immediately I could tell something was off about this guy. He smiled and stared, and tried to start a conversation with me. I was just keen to get to my bedroom. I rushed upstairs and got my pajamas on for bed, then dashed out to use the bathroom. As I was running, the man caught me and said, "You look nice in those pajamas." He was smiling at me and really creeping me out. I twisted out of his grip and went back to my room instead of using the bathroom. I shut the door behind me. I had a lock on my bedroom door, and you bet I used that right away. Almost immediately after I'd locked it, he began trying to pry open my bedroom door. I was so scared. I knew something was wrong with this guy. He had bad intentions. I dragged my bed all the way across the room just to block the door, just in case he managed to get it open or broke the lock somehow. At this point, he started to knock on the door instead. "I'm just trying to say hello, sweetie. Don't be so rude. Open the door for me." I didn't respond. I was panicking now. For all my bad decisions, I was a pretty smart 13-year-old, and I knew I was in some serious danger. The bed was blocking the door, and it was still locked as well. I could hear him slamming against it with his whole body, trying to get inside. I opened my bedroom window and screamed outside, "Help! Help me, please!" What I later found out was that one of my neighbors had heard me, and knowing my dad was an alcoholic, he assumed something must have happened to him. He came around, must have seen my dad was asleep. He then came up to my room. The man outside fled, and my neighbor began knocking to get in as well. I could hear his voice, a voice of safety. Although I trusted my neighbor, I was so shaken up that all I could do was sit in the corner of my room in a ball, crying, shaking, and panicked. He knocked on the door and was pushing against it to open it against the weight of my bed. Eventually, he did manage to get it open and gently checked up on me, assuming I must have been hurt by my dad or something. He held me while I composed myself and tried to explain what had happened. The man was long gone. I knew he could come back at any time in the future, though. My dad was never sober enough for me to have been able to explain what happened. That was the final straw for me. I alerted social services, and that's the night I ended up in the care system. I ended up living with my auntie until I was 16, so in the end, I suppose I got it much easier than most. This story is something I still think about from time to time, and it really creeps me out. I'm writing this to sort of get it off my chest. Almost 3 years ago, I was 17 years old. At this point, I was accustomed to being in horrible situations, as all I had was my mother, and she couldn't hold down a job for long. She had her own issues to tackle. And so, as I grew up, we stayed in and out of roommates' houses. We never really had a place of our own to stay, except for maybe twice. That didn't last long either. We'd always be forced into a new environment, with almost a snap of a finger. When I was 17, we were led into a situation where we were going to be homeless again. I was used to it at this point, as I had slept in the street far more often than I'd like. The day came when we had to leave our roommate's home. My mom was able to stay at her boyfriend's trailer, but I had nowhere to go. I had no friends at this point. I had halted my friendships because they were either bad for my health and mental state or were overall toxic. My mom offered for me to go with her, but I didn't want to. Her boyfriend was kind of weird, plus I was used to the street anyway. I didn't think it was bad as it was at the time. I got dropped off at McDonald's. I ate some burgers before I went off to the streets once more. Eventually the sun fled, and darkness was all that remained. I looked for a place to sleep for the night. I went into many places that night, trying to sleep, but none of them were working. It was either too hot, the lights would be too bright, or mosquitoes would bite me. That's when I remembered a house I used to go to chill in. This house had been under construction and was nearly finished. Because of this, all the doors shut properly, and the windows were settled as well, so there were no mosquitoes swarming around. I went through the back like always, and made my way upstairs. Eventually, I settled in the bathroom, because there was less debris on the floor. I laid down and tried to get some sleep. I started to hear some sounds downstairs, but I didn't really give it too much thought. I figured maybe it was the door I'd come through swinging open and closed or something. Eventually, after laying there for maybe an hour or so, I opened my phone and started to look at old photos of my life, thinking about how messed up it was I'd gotten to this point, how I'd lost everything. These strange noises were still happening this entire time. Eventually, for whatever reason, I got up and went to sit down on the back porch. I just couldn't sleep at all. I made my way down the stairs and out the back door. I was messing around for maybe 5 minutes on my phone when it happened. By pure coincidence, I saw movement to my left from the back door I'd just exited from. I glanced over, and it was like time itself had frozen. At first, I thought it was just an illusion, but that was wrong. I could see a man hiding in the darkness, peering past the wall inside to gaze at me. The lower half of his figure was behind the wall entirely, and I couldn't make out much of anything but his upper body. The rest of his body was leaning to the left, peeking from behind this wall, almost like the man was trying not to let me see him. He was almost a pure black silhouette. I couldn't make out any features of his face. After noticing him, I just sat there and stared at him for what felt like forever. I expected him to come outside and try to talk to me or something. I normally talk to a lot of homeless people, and I thought maybe this man was just homeless like me. He didn't move at all though. He was as still as a statue and quiet as a mouse. Maybe he didn't even know I'd noticed him. He just kept on staring at me the entire time. Eventually, after staring at him, I got up and got my bicycle and made my way out of the property. As I was walking out of the backyard, I peered back through the window. The moonlight revealed the man was still there, watching me walk out of the property. I could tell because the moonlight revealed the top of the man's head, and I saw his eyes gazing at me. He appeared to be a white male who was very tall and had a jacket of some sort on. After seeing this, I moved a little faster to get out of there. I got to the front of the house on the street and looked inside to see if I could see him better. I couldn't see him, but I could still feel him watching me. I waved goodbye to the house to signify I was leaving, just in case he still was. For the rest of the night, I couldn't properly sleep. I tried 2 different spots, but both were no luck. And that's where my story ends. I know it didn't have a crazy chase or a fight to the death with the man or anything like that, but this is real life, and not like movies or books. I don't know what the man was doing there. Maybe he was just trying to sleep like I was, but then why was he making all that noise and staring at me for so long? It was just very unnerving. It makes me wonder how long that man was in the house for, and what would have happened if I'd actually fallen asleep. Would he have just stared at me while I was sleeping, completely blinded to his presence? Or did he have other intentions? I never stayed long enough to know, but now I don't go to houses like that anymore, at least not after this experience. I'm a United States Postal Service employee, and this is by far the scariest thing that's ever happened to me. A coworker called in one day and said he couldn't make it to work for whatever reason. I was left with the responsibility of delivering all his mail on his route. I was not exactly happy about this, because his route involved going through the old town of the big city that I lived in. This old town was a tourist attraction of sorts. It had very old Western-style buildings, and the street was a dirt road. All of the buildings within this old town were mainly shops for tourists. Most of these buildings required the mail carrier to actually go inside as well, and hand-deliver the mail to the various shop owners. That took a lot of extra time, and meant you had to converse with most of them as well. I really disliked doing that for the most part. On this day, late in the afternoon, I entered a building, and was met with only a staircase. Obviously, just leaving it at the top of the stairs was not an option to deliver the mail, so of course I had to descend this staircase, which was an old winding metal one. It was uncomfortably long, and when I finally reached the bottom, the only thing I saw was a very long hallway with old light bulbs flickering above me. Along the hallway were various doors on both sides, almost similar to what you'd see in the hallway of a hotel. I paused for a second, not knowing what to do at this point. Where was I supposed to deliver the mail to? A second later, at the end of the hall though, I saw a man walk out of one of the doors on the left and immediately enter another room on the right. I didn't even have a chance to call out to him before he was already gone. After standing there for a few moments, I decided to walk down the hall. When I finally reached the end, I knocked on the door the man had walked into. Nothing happened, and he didn't open up either. Just then though, at the end of the hall where I'd just come from, I saw the same man walk out of a door on the same side of the hall I was on. He walked into the middle of the hallway and just stood there staring at me. I called out to the man, "Excuse me, sir, I have some mail here for you." He interrupted me by taking a machete out from behind him. At first, I thought this must be a joke, but when he started sprinting towards me, I decided it was not. I entered the room beside me. In this room was an old dark wine cellar from the looks of it. I immediately crawled underneath one of the old racks in which to store wine and thought, this can't really be happening. It was though. The man entered the room soon after, searching for me. He walked past the spot I was hiding in and continued down the rows of wine racks, sniffing the air. I got out from underneath the rack I was under when I felt he was far enough away to not catch me. I went back out into the hall and sprinted back down over to the staircase. Just as I hit the first metal step and began descending, I heard somebody running swiftly down the hall behind me. I skipped steps, going as fast as possible, back up that old staircase until I finally reached the top. I burst outside onto the dirt road and looked behind me. The man did not attempt to go through the door. I got into my service vehicle and sped the hell away from the old town. I later told my boss about this and said he would look into it. He said I shouldn't worry about it any further. I told him I'd never go there again, and he didn't try to argue with me. I was never really into video games when I was a kid. Given how into them my brother was, I always figured they were more for boys than they were for girls. He used to play all these super violent army kinds of games as well, and that stuff didn't really interest me in the least. I remembered though him playing this one game that looked a lot different from all the others he usually played. The art style, the clothes, the really nice music in the background had me transfixed from the second I laid eyes on it. Then, when I asked what he was playing, he replied 3 little words that had become some of the most precious memories of my life: Final Fantasy VIII. It was the game I found myself constantly watching him play, and after he graduated to a PlayStation 2, he gave me his old PS1, and I started to play for myself. I was just hooked for a long time. Without a doubt, my favorite character was Selphie. Selfie is this super cute derpy member of your team who uses these awesome nunchuck things to fight with. She also has the coolest hair of anyone in the game, in my opinion at least. It just so happened that I kind of looked like her too. One day, when my friend and I were doing each other's hair with these new curling irons her mom had bought her, I decided to curl the ends of my hair up like the character. I think it was the first real attempt at cosplay I ever did. So when I learned there were actual groups of people who not only dressed up like video game characters, but met at real places to show off their outfits and costumes, I was so on that. Over the years that followed, I ended up amassing all the items of clothing that she had in her outfit, with the goal of attending the biggest video games expo in the country. It wasn't easy finding the right style of boots, making a dress the perfect shade of canary yellow, but eventually I managed to piece together an outfit that looked exactly like it. The only thing I was lacking was the nunchucks, but then, like a lot of cosplayers, I ended up getting a hold of a cheap plastic toy pair that I painted the same style as hers. Finally, when everything was ready to go, I waited for E3 to come around. My dad drove me and my brother there as a very special shared birthday present. Our birthdays are only a month apart after all. The E3 we went to was one of the first ever to be open to the public too, so it felt like something really special to be able to attend. People were really nice about my outfit, and other Final Fantasy VIII cosplayers were coming up to me and asking for photos. My brother thought it was a total drag having to be my personal photographer for a while. He was an awesome brother though, and took lots of pictures of me with people, so I could remember the whole event for a long time after. He only had so much patience for that kind of thing though, so in the end we agreed to split up and meet up later on. He wanted to go check out all the exhibits he wanted to go see. I was all on my own now, but I was around so many other nice people that I didn't think I was in any danger at all. Besides, the entire place was teeming with security guards and stuff, so it felt like the safest place I could possibly be, also surrounded by many like-minded people, most of which were very nice. The first sign of trouble though came when this one guy came right up to me, told me Selfie was his favorite Final Fantasy character, then asked for a picture with me. For like the 100th time, I stopped a passerby, gave them my digital camera, and asked if they would take a picture of me and the person I was with. When they were lining up the shot though, the guy started whispering in my ear, "You know, you look really, really cute in that outfit." Just as the person took the picture and was handing me back my camera, he started to fondle my butt under my skirt, so hard actually, I actually yelped out in pain. I turned around instinctively, throwing a slap in the guy's direction. He backed off so quick though that it missed. People jumped in between us. "Hey, what's going on here?" I was just shouting stuff like, "He grabbed me! This pervert just touched me!" Only with way more curse words and stuff like that. One of the guys that jumped in pushed the man away, then came over to see if I was okay. I ended up venting a little bit about how I'd had such an amazing time, until this ass grabber came along to spoil it. The guy told me there were way too many guys like that at cons, but even so, they were still few and far between. He did the nicest thing ever after. He offered to walk me around the convention hall as a kind of bodyguard to make sure it didn't happen again. I mean, the guy was tall, handsome, and seemed like he was some sort of knight in shining armor type, so of course I said yes to the idea. We went walking together around the con after. This guy happened to be dressed like a samurai with some kind of sword with him. I wanted to say it looked like the vampire killer blade from some movie, but I know he wasn't that specific character. When I asked him, he laughed and told me he was supposed to be a guy from some anime. Obviously, the sword he had with him wasn't real, but he talked about how cool it would be if I had an actual pair of nunchucks. That's when he turned to me and said that as much as he wasn't allowed to bring any real weapons along with him to the convention hall, he had brought along things he usually kept in his trunk for personal protection. And there just so happened to be a pair of nunchucks in there. I thought that was just about the coolest thing I'd ever heard, and so I was impressed when he told me about all the different martial arts he did, hence why he owned such a random thing. He then asked me if I wanted to go out to his car and check them out together. I didn't hesitate at all. After all, he'd been the perfect gentleman so far, so why would I expect anything to change? We carried on chatting, and then as we walked out to his car, with me asking him if the things were heavy and how long he'd been training with them, all his answers seemed super genuine and honest. When we got to his car though, after walking through the parking lot for a while, I was more excited to see this real-life thing than I had been about the whole E3 thing in the first place. Only, when he opened his trunk, I didn't see anything in there. I looked at him confused, expecting him to have a similarly confused look on his face, but instead his look was one that literally made my stomach drop. He was completely expressionless, except for this intense look in his eyes. When I saw that, I knew immediately I had just made a huge mistake. Next thing I know, he'd grabbed me by the neck and was trying to shove me into the trunk of his car. I let out this manic screech of pure terror. I screamed longer and louder than I ever had in my life before or since. Not even real words, just a wail of absolute horror. I realized all that protectiveness he'd been showing me was just an act. The same guy that had warned me about all these weirdos at the con, about how there were only a few of them and not to let it ruin the experience. Well, he was one of them, and he'd been intending on kidnapping me from the very start. He actually managed to shove me all the way into his trunk at one point, and if it wasn't for me sticking a leg out at the last second, he would have trapped me in there for good. It was both kind of a blessing and a curse, though. The force with which he brought the trunk down on my leg made me feel sure he'd just broken it. It was completely numb. I guess the adrenaline was staving off the pain for the moment. That bought me a little more time to try and fight my way out of that trunk. But then, the more I fought, the more I realized it was no good. He was bigger and stronger than me. It was only a matter of time before he managed to completely overpower me. By far, though, the worst part was when he told me, "Don't make me shut you up." He'd been saying shut up and be quiet almost the whole time, but when he finally said that "don't make me," I realized it was either go along with the abduction, or he might actually kill me in order to not get caught. What choice did I have, though, other than carry on trying to save my own life? If I hadn't, I wouldn't be around to tell you this story. I guess the point you're wondering, though, is how I got out of such a situation. And honestly, I did nothing by myself. It all came down to a stroke of pure luck. It just so happened that a latecomer to the event had been driving around through the parking lot looking for a parking space, and just so happened to go through the same section we were in and hear my screams. It kinda makes my mind boggle at how the universe had to align that perfectly so someone was right there. Aside from that single latecomer, the parking lot was completely deserted of any other people. If he'd went out to his car a little earlier or later, or if that guy and his kids hadn't been stuck in traffic that morning after driving in from out of state, there's a good chance I wouldn't have survived the weekend. After running towards the sound of my screams, the guy managed to scare away the man trying to kidnap me, who took off when he realized he'd been discovered. The rest is kind of a blur of crying, talking to cops, and then driving to the hospital to get my leg checked out. The only really good news was that the cops managed to trace the guy's rental car to his dad because it was rented in his name. That's how they managed to arrest him before charging him with attempted kidnapping. That was my first real cosplaying experience, and it was completely ruined by some complete psycho who took advantage of my vulnerability to gain my trust enough to attempt to kidnap me. Who knows what he had in mind after? It took me a long time to even attempt to cosplay again, as the whole thing made me feel overwhelming anxiety whenever I so much as looked at a costume. This year, I'm finally able to wear it again, but I honestly don't think I'll be able to wear it in public, or at any kind of convention anytime soon. It's not just what happened to me either. It's that I've heard a lot of different stories about how female cosplays make a certain kind of guy act a certain kind of way. It's almost like when they see the fictional character, they assume we're not real people ourselves. That's the way I've come to see it anyway. It's not just with the actions either. I see all kinds of horrific comments directed towards female cosplayers on a variety of different websites too. It makes me think it's something you should just enjoy on your own, or with a circle of like-minded folks online. Communities that can easily be policed and controlled. Again though, that's just the way I see it. Either way, I'm going to be very careful in the future. Honestly, as scary as the ordeal was, not being able to express myself in the way I wanted after is the thing that made me the most sad. I've been going to San Diego Comic-Con for most of my adult life, but the first time I ever went, way back in 2010, something seriously crazy happened before one of the panels. I'm a huge Resident Evil fan. I love everything about the universe and the lore, and although the movies haven't always been the highest quality, I was excited to catch the Afterlife panel in Hall H. This was about the same time I found out the next panel was going to include Seth Rogen, and it was for some new comedy called Paul or something. I'm pretty indifferent to Simon Pegg, but I was a big Seth Rogen fan back then, so I figured I'd stick around and check it out a bit. Hall H was absolutely jam-packed at that time. Every single seat was taken, so like many others, I found myself standing at the back of the hall without anywhere to sit. Me and a friend of mine were just standing around, casually discussing where the Resident Evil franchise was headed, when out of nowhere, we heard blood-curdling screams not too far away. All heads instantly turned in the direction of where the scream was coming from, only to see a man with blood streaming down his face. He had a hand over his eye, and right next to him, a bunch of people were attacking this one kid who looked like he just stabbed the other one in the face with something. The whole back of the hall erupted into chaos, with people basically sitting on the kid who lashed out, while others sprinted to get security and the cops. Eventually, the cops showed up and put the kid in cuffs. As he was being let out, I noticed the weirdest little detail about him. He was wearing a blue Harry Potter t-shirt. I don't know why that stuck out with me so much. I guess because it was the last thing I expected him to be wearing. That whole franchise is so innocent and positive. At least, I think so anyway. So, to have a kid that was a fan of that stuff be so violent out of nowhere was super disturbing to me. Then, when I learned that it was all apparently down to one kid sitting too close to the other, that it was all just some dumb disagreement over seat space, that was ultra disturbing to me too. I mean, what a thing, to blind someone for life over a random seat space in a convention hall, all for some half-assed sci-fi movie made by some random British guy. That is pure insanity. That's the most messed up thing I've ever seen at Comic-Con, as it tends to be a really chill and positive experience. Honestly though, I always wonder if the next year I attend, I'm going to see another nerd rage incident just like that. Sorry for the long story, but I can't exactly figure out this person's motive. One night, I was in bed with my boyfriend, and it was around 1:30 a.m. or so. All of a sudden, I get a text from a random number, saying, "Is this my name? Sorry for messaging you late and out of the blue like this, but I don't think my boyfriend's name is being honest with you, and I needed to talk to you." We exchanged a few texts, and basically they were accusing my boyfriend of cheating on the both of us. Obviously, I was pretty annoyed. Bear in mind, it was also June 2020, bang in the middle of coronavirus lockdown in the UK. We'd spent all day, every day together since March. He denied it, of course, and insisted he didn't know who this person was. The same number started texting him as well, angry texts, calling him a lying rat. It was not looking good for the boyfriend. But then, this is where it started to get weird. The person refused to give any specifics, wouldn't tell me their name, what my boyfriend had done, even my boyfriend's name, just that he was a liar, and I was an idiot for believing him. Whenever I would ask why, they would just reply with vague, angry, threatening texts. Their grammar and spelling was good, but they seemed to be using slang words from the local area. We assumed maybe it was some kids who'd found our numbers off Facebook or something, and were trying to have a laugh, so we tried ignoring it. Then, nothing else. That was until my boyfriend got a text the following afternoon asking him to meet that person at a local social club for some company. Me and a friend hopped in the car and went down there to investigate, only no one was there, and the club had been closed because of COVID. We still couldn't help but feel, though, like we were being watched. It was so weird. A few days ago, after a while, the same number started texting me again. This time it was all weird. It almost felt like it was a different person texting me. They also seemed a lot angrier with me now because I didn't believe them. Then they started to text me stuff like, "You're so dull. You know I saw him leaving your house earlier." I said something funny like, "Where's my house then?" They replied with the exact street address and street name. They also knew various things about us, like the fact my boyfriend had been in the army. I called them loads, but it would always just ring twice and cut off immediately. I tried searching the number on WhatsApp and a few social media websites, but nothing. Only on Instagram would the number come up, with the location of a film company in Ralt, Netherlands. Then, when I'd Google the number, its provider was something I'd never heard of before. Looks like it was probably a fake number. They never asked for any money or anything like that. I don't know why someone would go through that much effort to try and wind us up. In fact, the last text they sent was, "Okay, I'll be seeing you soon." Creepy. Any advice you can offer? What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. If you liked the video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you have any feedback for me as well, be sure to leave that in comments below the video. If you guys have a story you'd like to send in, or if you'd like to contact me for any reasons, there will be links to my social media in the description below the video, including my Facebook, Gmail, and Twitter accounts. Go ahead and send me a message on any of those, and I'll try to get to you as soon as possible. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include in the tagline what the name of the story is if it has one, what type of story it is if it has one, and how you'd like to be credited in the description below the video. Please make sure to include as much detail as you feel comfortable with, and try to use as much proper grammar as possible to make sure you have the highest chance of appearing in a future video. Overall, I think that's pretty much it for now, guys, so thank you so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.